All right, so you wanted to take a deep dive into social barriers, and
Yeah.
you sent over some fascinating articles
Yeah.
focused on France in particular.
Right.
And it seems like the country is really kind of grappling with this diploma versus potential debate.
Hmm.
We've got this piece here from Reset Learning.
Okay.
It's a distance learning center.
Right.
And the title of the article is Racisme social dans la formation, quand le diplôme prime sur le potentiel,
Okay.
which translates to social racism in training when the diploma trumps potential.
Hmm.
That's heavy stuff.
It is. The article's premise is pretty provocative. It argues that this emphasis
Yeah.
on diplomas that they have in France is creating a system of social racism,
Okay.
where people are shut out of opportunities, not because they lack skills, but because they don't have
Yeah.
the traditional academic credential.
Okay, walk me through this.
Sure.
How does this social racism play out in real life?
Well, the article focuses on training centers,
Okay.
particularly in tech fields like
Right.
web development.
Okay.
So let's say you want to get into web development.
Yeah.
You're a fantastic coder. You're
Ah.
totally self-taught. You're building websites in your spare time.
Right.
But some of these training centers
Yeah.
are demanding master's level diplomas, even if the job doesn't require
Wow.
that level of academic knowledge.
So even though you have the practical skills,
Yeah,
this piece of paper becomes this
exactly.
barrier.
Huge barrier.
That's wild. It's like saying you need a degree in marine biology to be a lifeguard,
It,
even if you're a phenomenal swimmer and grew up on the coast.
exactly.
So what happens to people who hit this diploma wall?
The article highlights that a staggering 1 in 5 adults in France
Wow.
are learning technical skills on their own. They're motivated, they're putting in the work, but then they hit this wall when they
Wow.
try to get certified or advanced because they don't have the formal qualifications.
It feels like a real catch-22, especially if you think about people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who might not have even had that same access
Absolutely.
to higher education in the first place.
This is where the social racism aspect comes in. It's not necessarily about overt discrimination,
Okay.
but about how this system disproportionately impacts people from certain backgrounds.
Got it.
It reinforces existing inequalities.
So you're saying it's less about your actual ability and more about whether
Yeah.
you fit into this very specific mold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, the article points to some pretty striking examples.
Okay.
Figures like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, massive innovators, but none of them followed a conventional
Right.
academic path. They didn't need a piece of paper to prove their potential.
And they're not alone. Even in France, you have figures like President Macron and the Minister of Education, Gabriel Attal,
Right.
who don't fit the typical educational mold. It seems like even the French system itself is producing these outliers
Yeah.
who demonstrate that success doesn't always require this traditional path.
That's a really interesting point. It seems to suggest that even within France, there's an acknowledgement,
Yeah.
at least on some level, that talent can exist outside of the traditional academic track. But the system itself doesn't seem to have fully caught up to this reality.
So if this over-reliance on diplomas is so problematic, what's the solution? What does the article suggest we do about it?
It calls for a pretty significant shift in mindset,
Okay.
both on an individual and a societal level.
Okay.
Instead of automatically equating a diploma with competence,
Yeah.
we need to start valuing skills and demonstrable talent.
So how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do you shift an entire system's way of thinking?
Well, the article proposes a few key strategies. First, move away from unnecessary diploma requirements. Really scrutinize job descriptions.
Okay.
And ask, does this role truly require a master's degree, or are we just defaulting to that because it's always been done this way?
That makes sense. It's about being more thoughtful and intentional about what qualifications
Yeah.
are actually needed. What else?
Second, implement skills-based assessments. Instead of just looking at a resume, actually test people's abilities.
Okay.
Think practical test portfolio reviews anything that allows individuals to showcase what they can do,
Okay.
rather than just listing qualifications.
So we're talking about move away from theory and more towards practical application.
Yes,
But wouldn't this require a huge overhaul of current systems?
it would. But the article argues that it's absolutely necessary.
Okay.
If we want to create a fairer and more competitive society.
And this isn't just about fairness, right? If we're limiting our talent pool based on these arbitrary criteria, we're missing out on a lot of potential innovation.
Exactly. And that's a key point that the article makes. It links this over-reliance on diplomas to a breakdown of
Okay.
social mobility.
Explain that a little bit more. What do they mean by a breakdown of social mobility?
It means that it's becoming increasingly difficult for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to climb the social ladder, even if they have the talent
Huh?
and drive to succeed.
Yeah.
They're being held back by these diploma requirements that they may not be able to meet, not because they lack ability,
Right.
but because they lack access.
And the article backs this up with some pretty sobering statistics.
Mm.
They cite data from the Observatory of Inequalities,
Yes.
showing that only 17% of children from disadvantaged backgrounds make it to higher social classes compared to 70%
It's a huge
from wealthy families.
disparity.
Yeah.
And it suggests that the system as it stands is perpetuating inequality
Right.
rather than promoting opportunity.
So if we're being honest, this goes way beyond just individual hardship.
Absolutely.
It has implications for a country's overall economic competitiveness and social fabric.
It stifles innovation, it reinforces existing power structures,
Wow.
and it ultimately weakens society as a whole.
Now, I do want to acknowledge that Reset Learning, the organization behind this article, has a vested interest in this topic.
Of course.
They're a distance learning center,
Right.
so they offer an alternative model that focuses on skills and potential, not just formal qualifications.
That's true. It's important to keep their perspective in mind. But even with that considered, their arguments raise some really important questions about the way we evaluate talent and the barriers that prevent people from reaching their full potential.
Right. And they're not just pulling these ideas out of thin air. They're citing research and trends, like that prediction from the World Economic Forum that by 2030, half of all jobs
Wow.
will require skills that aren't even being taught in traditional education systems.
That's a pretty startling statistic. It suggests that we're heading towards a future where adaptability, lifelong learning,
Yeah.
and a willingness to embrace new skills are going to be more important than ever before.
So clinging to this outdated notion of diplomas as the be-all and end-all of qualification is not only unfair, it's potentially setting us up for failure. It's on a larger scale.
Exactly. It's like trying to fight a modern war with outdated weapons. We need to adapt if we want to thrive.
This is starting to feel like a much bigger conversation than just France and its diplomas.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the future of work itself and how we prepare people for a world that's changing at an incredibly rapid pace.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. This isn't just about tweaking a few policies or adding some skills-based assessments here and there. It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about education, talent, and opportunity.
It's about creating a system that's more agile, more inclusive, and ultimately more effective at preparing people for the challenges and possibilities of the future.
And that's a challenge that we all need to be thinking about, regardless of where we live or what field we're in.
This has been incredibly insightful, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this issue. Are you ready to unpack this even further?
Absolutely. Let's delve deeper.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this diploma issue ties into this much bigger conversation about social mobility and opportunity.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out a bit. Is this a uniquely French problem, or are we seeing these similar dynamics play out in other parts of the world?
It's definitely not limited to France.
Yeah.
While the article focuses on the French context, this tension between diplomas and demonstrable skills is a global phenomenon.
Really?
You see it in the US, the UK,
Wow.
even in rapidly developing economies in Asia and Africa.
So what is it about these diplomas that makes them so universally appealing? Why are they seen as this golden ticket, even when they might not actually reflect people's abilities?
Well, I think there are a few factors at play here.
Okay.
First, diplomas provide a sense of standardization in a complex world.
Yeah.
They offer a seemingly objective way to evaluate and compare candidates.
Okay.
They create a shorthand that employers, educational institutions,
Right.
and even individuals themselves can rely on.
It's like a quality control label.
Exactly.
You see a certain degree and you assume a certain level of knowledge or skill has been attained.
And that can be useful, especially in fields where there are clear professional standards and licensing requirements.
Right.
But the problem is that this standardization can become rigid and inflexible, failing to account for the diverse ways in which people learn and develop their skills.
And it can also create this false sense of security. Just because someone has a diploma, it doesn't necessarily mean they're the best person for the job or even that they're competent at all.
That's right. Diplomas can sometimes mask underlying issues of quality and relevance.
Right.
And they can lead to a situation where we're prioritizing credentials over competence, which ultimately hurts everyone in the long run.
So if we accept that this diploma-centric system is flawed, what are the alternatives?
Right.
How do we shift towards a more nuanced and dynamic approach to evaluating talent?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think one important step is to start thinking about skills as a currency.
Okay.
Just like we have financial capital, we also have human capital, which is the sum of our knowledge, skills, and abilities.
So instead of viewing a diploma as the end goal, we should be thinking about it as one possible pathway
Exactly.
to developing our human capital.
And there are many other pathways like apprenticeships,
Okay.
online courses, self-directed learning, and even just plain old experience.
The article mentions this idea of skills-based assessments as a way to move beyond the limitations of diplomas. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? What does that look like in practice?
Sure. Skills-based assessments are designed to evaluate an individual's actual abilities,
Okay.
rather than their educational background or credentials.
Okay.
This could involve things like practical tests, simulations, portfolio reviews, or even work samples.
So instead of just listing your qualifications on a resume, you'd be demonstrating your skills in a more hands-on way.
Right. It's about showing, not just telling.
Okay.
And this shift towards skills-based assessments is already happening in certain industries, particularly in tech and other fields where practical skills are highly valued.
It makes sense. If you're hiring a software developer, you'd probably be more interested in seeing their code than their diploma.
Exactly. And there are a growing number of online platforms and tools
Right.
that are making it easier for individuals to showcase their skills and for employers to evaluate those skills in a more objective and standardized way.
But isn't there a risk that these assessments could become just as rigid and standardized as the diploma system that they're trying to replace?
That's a valid concern, and it's something we need to be mindful of.
Yeah.
The goal is not to simply replace one set of rigid criteria with another.
Okay.
It's about creating a more flexible and dynamic system
Right.
that recognizes the diverse ways in which people learn and develop their skills.
So it's not just about changing the tools, it's about changing the mindset.
Precisely. We need to move away from the idea that there's one right way to learn or to qualify for a particular job. Instead, we should embrace the idea of multiple pathways to success and create systems that allow individuals to demonstrate their competence in a variety of ways.
That sounds great in theory,
Yeah.
but how do we actually make this shift happen in practice?
Well, it's going to require a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
We need buy-in from employers,
Yeah.
educational institutions, policymakers, and individuals themselves.
Let's start with employers. What can they do to embrace this more skills-based approach?
First and foremost, they need to be willing to challenge their own assumptions about what constitutes qualified,
Okay.
instead of automatically screening out candidates who don't have a specific degree.
Right.
They should be open to considering individuals who have acquired relevant skills through alternative pathways.
So it's about looking beyond the resume
Yeah.
and really digging into a candidate's actual abilities
Exactly.
and potential.
And that means being willing to invest in skills-based assessments, either by developing their own or by utilizing existing platforms and tools. They also need to be open to providing training and development opportunities to help employees upskill and reskill as needed.
So it's not just about hiring for skills, it's about cultivating skills within the workforce.
Absolutely. And that requires a shift in mindset
Okay.
from a focus on short-term costs to a focus on long-term investment in human capital.
What about educational institutions?
Yeah.
What role do they play in this transition?
They need to adapt their curricula and teaching methods to better align with the evolving needs of the workforce.
Okay.
This means offering more hands-on, project-based learning experiences
Yeah.
that allow students to develop practical skills
Okay.
and to build a portfolio of work that
Yeah.
they can showcase to potential employers.
And it also means being more open to recognizing and validating skills acquired through non-traditional means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This could involve offering credits for prior learning, partnering with online learning platforms to offer micro-credentials,
Yeah.
or even creating their own badging systems to
Uh-huh.
recognize specific skills and competencies.
And what about policymakers?
Yeah.
What can they do to support this shift towards a more skills-based economy?
They can create incentives for employers to invest in skills training and development.
Right.
They can fund apprenticeships and other alternative pathways to education and employment.
Yeah.
And they can invest in infrastructure like broadband access and digital literacy programs to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in the digital economy.
It sounds like we're talking about a pretty fundamental rethinking of the way we approach education, work, and even success itself.
You're absolutely right. It's a big challenge,
Yeah.
but it's also a huge opportunity.
Right.
If we can get this right, we
Yeah.
can create a more equitable, innovative, and prosperous society for everyone.
And it all starts with recognizing that talent is everywhere, and
Yes.
that we need to create systems and cultures that allow that talent to flourish, regardless of where it comes from or what path it took to get there.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's about recognizing the inherent worth and potential of every individual and creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to contribute their unique gifts and talents to making the world a better place.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's inspiring and hopeful.
It is, and it's something we can all strive for.
Well, this has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a lot more informed, but also energized to think about these issues in a new light.
I'm glad to hear that. That's what this deep dive is all about.
I think our listeners probably feeling the same way.
Hopefully.
Ready to keep exploring.
Absolutely. Let's dive into the next part of this discussion.
Okay, so we've established that this isn't just a French problem. It's a global conversation about how we value skills and potential,
Right.
especially as the world of work changes so rapidly. But I'm curious, if we were to totally rethink this system,
Yeah.
what would that actually look like? What's the ideal scenario here?
Well, it's an interesting thought experiment. I
Yeah.
think in an ideal world, we'd have a system that's much more fluid and personalized. Instead of this one-size-fits-all approach to education and career paths, we'd recognize that people learn and thrive in
Wow.
different ways.
So less about checking boxes and more about fostering individual talents.
Exactly. Imagine a world where your learning journey isn't confined to a set number of years
Right.
in a formal institution.
Yeah.
You could be acquiring skills throughout your life through a mix of formal and informal learning experiences, online courses, apprenticeships, mentorships, even passion projects.
It's like that old saying, life is a journey, not a destination. Maybe learning should be viewed the same way.
I love that analogy. And in this ideal scenario, assessment would be continuous and integrated into the learning process. Instead of high-stakes exams that determine your entire future, you'd be constantly demonstrating your skills through projects, portfolios, and real-world applications.
So it's less about proving what you know and more about showcasing what you can do.
Precisely. And this would not only benefit individuals by providing them with more flexible and personalized learning paths.
Yeah. But it would also benefit employers by giving them a much richer and more accurate picture of a candidate's abilities.
It seems like this kind of system would require a lot of trust and collaboration
It would.
between individuals, educational institutions, and employers.
It definitely would. It would require a shift away from the traditional hierarchical model of education and employment towards a more networked and collaborative approach.
That sounds both exciting and incredibly challenging. Do you see any signs that we're moving in this direction?
We are, maybe not as quickly as we'd like,
Yeah.
but there are definitely pockets of innovation happening all over the world.
Uh-huh.
We're seeing the rise of alternative credentialing systems,
Yeah.
like digital badges and micro-credentials that are starting to disrupt the traditional diploma paradigm.
You mentioned those earlier. It seems like these micro-credentials are a way to recognize and validate skills in a more granular and personalized way.
Exactly. And they can be earned through a variety of learning experiences, not just formal degrees.
Right. This allows people to showcase their unique skills and talents in a way that's much more relevant
Yeah.
to the modern workforce.
So it's less about having one big piece of paper that's supposed to represent your entire skill set,
Right.
and more about having a collection of smaller, more specific credentials that reflect your actual abilities.
Precisely. And because these micro-credentials are often tied to specific projects or assessments,
Okay.
they provide a much more reliable signal of competence than a traditional diploma,
Right.
which might not always reflect what someone can actually do.
This all sounds incredibly promising, but I have to ask the practical question.
Yeah.
Are employers actually starting to accept and value these alternative credentials?
They are. Maybe not universally,
Okay.
but there's a growing number of forward-thinking companies, especially in the tech sector, that are moving away from rigid diploma requirements
Okay.
and embracing a more skills-based approach to hiring.
So it seems like the demand for skills is actually driving this change, at least in certain industries.
It is.
The need for talent is forcing companies to be more open to non-traditional pathways.
Absolutely. And this trend is only going to accelerate as technology continues to evolve and the demand for specialized skills intensifies.
It makes me wonder if we're on the cusp of a major paradigm shift in the way we think about education,
I think we are.
work, and success. What do you think?
I think we are. We're moving from a world where knowledge was scarce and credentials were the primary way to signal competence
Right.
to a world where information is abundant and skills are the real currency.
And in this new world, the ability to learn, adapt, and continuously acquire new skills will be the key to success.
Absolutely. Lifelong learning is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into this complex world of diplomas, social mobility, and the future of work,
Yeah.
what's the one key takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
I think the most important message is this. Don't let a piece of paper define your potential. The world is changing, and the skills you acquire through experience, passion, and a willingness to learn are just as valuable as any formal qualification.
So whether you have a stack of diplomas or you're forging your own unique path, never stop learning, never stop growing, and never stop believing in your own ability to make a difference in the world.
Beautifully said. I couldn't have put it better myself.
This has been another fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.